Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about even more broken and overpowered legendary lords in Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires. These legendary lords are very powerful in their campaigns. They have a lot of potential, they have a lot of strength, they can paint the campaign map far easier than many other legendary lords in the game. Or even if they're not necessarily the fastest at conquering the map, they have enormous power when it comes to their campaigns. And to be very clear, what makes a legendary lord powerful is not just their combat potential. It's not just like having one really powerful army. It's being able to afford 6 powerful armies during the course of your campaigns, each of them quite capable of defeating legendary lords on their own. A great example of this, of a really powerful legendary lord, is of course Grom the Paunch, because here's the thing that makes Grom so powerful. And people say, oh, it's his faction effects, it's not his own skill line. Well, yeah, Grom is the leader of the faction. But here's the thing. Because he gives his faction so many buffs through his cauldron, each of his armies is quite capable of standing up against many more powerful armies. Like, I've been playing Grom the Paunch campaign, and with my secondary armies, not my primary army, I've been able to defeat legendary lords and their main armies in battle, because Grom gives you significant faction-wide benefits. That's what makes a legendary lord powerful. In contrast, Warzag over here, is not really a powerful legendary lord. Yes, the greenskins are powerful, and yes, Warzag is an incredible caster, and yes, he gets significant benefits for the Savage Orcs in his own army. But the other armies he has are not special in any way, shape, or form, because the only faction-wide benefit that you're really going to get is that charge bonus for Savage Orc units. And Savage Orcs are pretty decent, but it's only really Warzag that's going to have a really powerful army during his campaign. So when I'm thinking about power, I'm thinking about faction-wide power being more important than just having one really, really powerful army. Number 5, we have Azag the Slaughterer for the greenskins, and I think a lot of people tend to underestimate the potential that exists in this campaign. Like all other greenskin legendary lords, Azag is pretty powerful just because of his race, but there's a lot more to it than just simply the race here at play. First off, his starting position is relatively safe because he starts in the mountains, he gets a gold mine here in Karak Ungor. He starts with tier 2 settlement, so in just 2 turns he can start recruiting nasty skulkers. That is a significant amount of potential. And he can also start getting trolls within 3 turns. Again, more potential in this campaign. So he has a pretty fast start to his campaign. Trolls are good because they're really good siege units, even like the basic tier 2 trolls. The tier 3 trolls are incredible units in battle, especially in sieges. Just throw them through the gates, they'll break through, allowing the rest of your army to go into the settlement. One of the problems a lot of legendary lords can have in their campaigns is actually just breaking through sieges. Well, the greenskins have a good situation when it comes to that, and Azag certainly has a really good situation as well. On top of that, faction-wide effects, he gets a diplomatic relations benefit with vampire counts in Ark in the Black, so he's nullifying the aversion the vampire counts have towards the greenskins, which is minus 40. So you can make diplomatic deals with Vlad and Isabella in his campaign. On top of that, he gets a 25% income benefit from sacking settlements and a research benefit as well of 20%. The research benefit is pretty damn good because it means you can access a lot of the good stuff much quicker with Azag than you could with other legendary lords of the greenskins. The sacking benefit means that you have a significant economic benefit. It's not the same as Grom the Paunch. Grom will certainly have a lot more money, but Grom also starts with a bunch of unpleasant climate and a bunch of enemies surrounding him. Azag does not. Furthermore, when we're looking at his lord effects, he gets the Slaughterer, so he gets Azag's Wa. Then he gets an upkeep for Orc units and Big Guns infantry units, Frenzy for those units as well, various benefits, hero capacity and hero recruit rank for shamans, so he's going to have more casters than the other greenskin legendary lords, and he also gets passive ability regeneration, so he can regenerate in combat, and he has Skull Mancha, which is a pretty good mount choice. So he's very difficult to take down in battle. I mean, he doesn't hold the candle to Grimgor in terms of dueling capacity, but dueling capacity is not the be-all and end-all. I would say Azag is actually better at dealing with armies than he is with dealing with lords, whereas Grimgor is really good at dealing with lords and heroes, but doesn't necessarily have the army killing ability that someone like Azag has in his campaign. But it's not really the faction benefits or the lord benefits that make Azag stand out. Here's the thing. Terrain availability plays a major role in every campaign. You can have a really powerful legendary lord, but if you can't expand quickly around you, your campaign is going to be limited. So here's the benefit when we're looking at Azag. He can take Wasteland, he can take Mountains like every other Greenskin legendary lord, but he can also take Temperate and Savannah. So what that means is that Azag can take the entirety of the Empire, can take the entirety of Bretonnia, which is actually pretty rare that he has so much territorial type. So Azag, from his starting position, can take pretty much everything in the map, in the old world, all the way to Khemri, in the Darklands, in the Mountains of Morn, and even a fairly substantial portion of Cathay. So you have a lot of territory. And the reason this climate situation is important is it means you can expand faster, it means you can grow settlements faster, you already have a fairly substantial economic benefit, but you have a hidden economic benefit because of the terrain suitability that you have in your campaign. You also start with wizardly weapons. Yeah, there's a bit of a UI bug, but this gives you armor piercing for your Biggins and your Orc Boys. Which actually makes up for one of the issues that Orc Boys and Biggins can have to a certain extent, because they don't necessarily have the best armor piercing damage. So being able to get a benefit when it comes to armor piercing can be pretty damn useful when it comes to your army strength. But on top of that, beyond the starting position, which is great, beyond the terrain types, Azag has a lot of potential that someone like Grimgor or Skarsnik or Warzag just do not have in their campaigns. So one of the things you can do very quickly is take Fort Jakova, and that will give you good relations with Katrin. You can make an alliance with Katrin playing as Azag. Sounds ridiculous, but it is actually something that's very, very doable during Azag's campaign. If you could take Vitevo before Katrin, you will be certainly assured an alliance. And if you send some armies to help Katrin, even better. So that's one of the things to mention here. You have a lot of diplomatic potential in this campaign as well. Beyond that particular situation, here's one of the hidden strengths that Azag has, and only really he has it. Because if you're playing as Grimgor and you try and confederate like Azag and Skarsnik, you can, but you're not really going to gain a lot of territory from that. Whereas if you're playing as Azag, you can get a lot of territory from that. Well, if you're playing Skarsnik and you confederate Grimgor, you certainly can get a lot of territory from Grimgor, but you won't get a lot of territory from Azag. Whereas Azag, he's in a prime position to really take advantage of Skarsnik doing well in his campaign. He can aid Skarsnik by just defeating Ungrim, which is a natural path during your expansion, and then he can take advantage of Grimgor. Like, all you really need to do to confederate Grimgor or Skarsnik is just find their main army, beat them in battle, and you'll gain every bit of territory that they have. And now here's the thing. Grimgor, he generally builds a massive empire. He can build a massive empire throughout the entirety of the Darklands and the Mountains of Morn. And if you keep track of him, if you have a hero tailing his ass, so to speak, you can just sneak up on him with a really powerful army and take him in battle directly, even when his army is at full strength. Or you can wait for an opportunity when Grimgor is weaker, when he's taken some casualties, to just knock him out and force that confederation, and thus gaining his entire empire. And his empire is generally going to stretch all the way from Saber Mountain, potentially to the Ivory Road, maybe even beyond that. The last time I played the campaign as Azag, Grimgor's empire stretched all the way to the Haunted Forest, pretty much. And I was just able to sneak up on Grimgor, knock him out, and gain his entire empire. Speaking about Skarsnik, what Skarsnik will do if he's not being pressured by Ungrim, because what generally happens in this campaign Forgrim and Skarsnik fight it out, but Skarsnik ends up losing most of the time. The reason he ends up losing isn't because Forgrim is necessarily better than him. He isn't. It's rather because Ungrim comes up from the north, pressures Skarsnik, declares war on Skarsnik. Skarsnik ends up having to fight the two-front war, and he ends up losing it. Well, if you help Skarsnik, and you don't even need to help him directly, though you could, if you help Skarsnik to a degree or another, then what Skarsnik's going to do is he's going to take the Dwarven capital, and then he's going to take a lot of territory all the way here to the Eastern Badlands. And then you can go in there and knock him out. And that means that you can let the AI do your work for you and take advantage of what the AI is doing and gain a massive empire in the process. To give you a notion, I played an entire campaign on Legendary very hard with Azag, and in 50 turns I had an empire all the way from my starting location down here to the Barrier Idols in the Battlelands, and in the Mountains of Morn down here to Noblar Country and the Haunted Forest. But a lot of that territory I gained by just confederating Skarsnik and Grimgor. And that's the thing about Azag. That's his hidden strength. That Azag himself, when he's controlled by the AI, doesn't do a great deal. But Grimgor does do a great deal in virtually every campaign I've played on Legendary in this game. Grimgor has always built a major empire, with some exceptions when he gets wiped out by Kolek. That's very, very rare, and you would have to be very unlucky for that to happen. So you have a campaign with a lot of money, a lot of potential of growth, a lot of potential to build a massive empire very, very quickly, and an empire where you can get good diplomatic relations with Sylvania, good diplomatic relations with Catherine, and Sylvania will keep the rest of the empire at bay, allowing you to focus on other things during your campaign. My advice: you do need to take Ostermark and Ostland during this campaign. So probably my advice would be to go beat up Festus, take Mindeland for yourself, take Talabecland. You do have a lot of choices in this campaign, and you have a lot of power. And when you do decide to go after Skarsnik, just send a hero to keep track of him, find out where he is, find out where his main army is, maybe even enable camera settings just for his faction so you can keep track of him on the campaign map. And when you find his army, you chase it down, you take him out, you gain a significant amount of power because of everything Skarsnik and Grimgor have done in their own respective campaigns. That is the power of Azag the Slaughterer. That's what he has to offer. He can build an empire probably faster than all the other Greenskin Legendary Lords. Like, Grom has a lot of power in his campaign, but Grom also has to deal with Ulfwan, which is never an easy proposition. But of course, like, Grom has significant benefits. I would say Azag is second only to Grom. I mean, Grimgor is much better as a duelist. He has no real opponents, but nor do you really, because there's no major faction that's going to oppose you with the exception of Ungrim, and you're stronger than Ungrim. Like, your army may not necessarily be a match for him. Big deal. Bring 2 free armies, full Wa on Ungrim. He's not going to survive against that. And it's not like Ungrim doesn't have other issues to deal with during the course of his campaign. And you can rush Ungrim as well. At number 4, we have Elfarion the Grim. When people think of good High Elven Legendary Lords, they think of Alifanar, they think of Alariel or Tyrion. But Elfarion is secretly better than Tyrion from my perspective during the course of his campaign. He has a lot of potential, a lot of power during the campaign, and quite a bit of it is not necessarily obvious from the very start of it. And some of it is something that people may not realize from the very start of his campaign. So he starts with an army here. He's basically leading an invasion of the Badlands over here against the Greenskins, because the Greenskins savage the Vress. He hates the Greenskins. He's coming after them. He starts with a pretty decent army, pretty powerful army that he can use to defeat many of the factions surrounding him in the Badlands. But he also has a second army over here in Torre Vress, though he may not keep it. The way this works is that the first settlement you take, I'm just going to set this to easy so I can auto-resolve these battles. The first settlement you take will give you a campaign choice. Either you're going to keep a Vress or you're going to give it up. It doesn't matter which settlement is the first you take, regardless of which one it is. you are always going to get that particular choice during the course of your campaign. So you can either focus on the invasion of the Badlands, or you can keep Everest. If you keep Everest, you gain a control benefit as well as an influence benefit. If you give up Everest, you get a significant amount of money. There's pros and cons with both approaches. Having a lot of money early on in a campaign can be pretty useful. Having a lot of influence can be useful. The money obviously for buildings, for units. The influence for recruiting another lord. Though, to be fair, you can always use the load character benefit to load a high-level lord. So starting with that kind of money can give you a benefit if you're willing to load a character. So over here, this army has done its job. I'm just going to abandon the settlement. I could have raised it to the ground as well over there for some warden supply. You also get a chance in auto-resolve, or you can do it manually, to capture lords in battle if you're playing as Elfarian. Now, crucially, if you give up Tor of Rest, let's just continue talking about that, but if you give up Tor of Rest, it's that's going to get it. And that means from the very start of your campaign, you can get trade agreement with Tyrion, with Crix. You can start getting those trade agreements, start getting vision over Ulthuan and getting those trade partners, and start to establish those diplomatic agreements. It just kind of sucks if you take the settlement first, that it becomes your capital. I guess you can move your army in this region and take this one first. The crucial thing is you want your army that is in the Everest region, you want to move it out of the Everest region, and then maybe, so just fight the battle here, and then take over the settlement, then take over the settlement, sell it to Tyrion for even more money from the very start. And now I can recruit a lord through the load save character, and because I have the money for it, and this lord has some really sweet benefits. So I can start doing some global recruitment with him, doing some local recruitment. I have a local recruitment benefit with him because he's a very, very high level lord. So I'm getting a lot of power in this campaign from the very start. And this is actually one of the few campaigns where you can do this, where you can just load a lord that's pretty high level, very high level, and just take advantage of having a lord with a very high level skill. Because generally you won't have the money to be able to do it on turn one, but the money you get from selling Tor of Rest will give you that power. If you go for the influence, what the influence does is it will allow you to recruit a lord at level 1 with some good effects, like the ammunition experience gain for a prince, for instance, or for a mage administrator or incendiary. Great deal of power, great deal of potential over here. And you are more powerful than other factions. That's just one of the things. That's the starting situation. You have free campaigns. You can either disband your initial army over here in the Badlands and just fight the campaign for Everest. In Ulthuan, that will work pretty well. You'll just basically be fighting a campaign as Tyrion, though in a lot of ways easier than what Tyrion has to deal with, because Tyrion has to deal with Safri, then he has to march all the way north to deal with the Phoenix Gate, whereas you can just march north, kill Nakari before Nakari becomes an issue, then deal with Noctilus, unify Ulthuan, and then march on Nagrand, or go back into the Badlands, because the campaign objectives of your campaign do require you to deal with the Badlands. To be fair out to the factions here, the only one that won't generally die very easily is going to be Scarbrand. Like, with the Badlands, you have the ability to take over the Wasteland, you have the ability to take over Ulthuan and the Dark Elven territory, so you do have quite a bit of terrain flexibility. Not as much as Teclis, but certainly better than what most of the High Elven campaigns have. Like, better than Alifanar, because for him, most of Ulthuan is unpleasant. Better than Tyrion or Alariel, because Wasteland isn't pleasant for them, because you having pleasant climate in Ulthuan and Wasteland is actually a pretty substantial advantage when it comes to the Elven Empire. It allows you to expand across like the Badlands and the Darklands over here, though sadly enough you can't colonize the mountains. If you could colonize the mountains, you would be even more ridiculously powerful. On top of that, you have the interrogation ability through the dungeon of over here. Now, the dungeon will mainly give you capacity for the the special units that only Elfarian can recruit through this for this chain, the Mistwalker units. Now he will buff the Mistwalker units for a special skill line, but you can buff them even further by going into the prison. And what you do in the prison is you enable the ability to interrogate prisoners, and you capture prisoners and you interrogate them. That gives the Mistwalker units benefits. So the Mistwalkers are like the Faith Bearers, the Sentinels, the Spire Guard, the Skyhawks, and of course the Knights of Tor Gaval. So these units are pretty strong by default, and you can make them far stronger through the buffs you can get for interrogation. Crucially with the prison over here, when you capture a lord and even a legendary lord, and this especially works very well with legendary lords, is you can release them. Now you won't get the defeat trait initially for a legendary lord if you capture them like this, but you can release them and you can siphon money from that faction. So say for instance, I'm fighting Queek, right? Which is something that's likely going to happen if you're playing campaign as Elfarian. You capture Queek, you defeat him, you capture him, you use the Warden's Cage ability, that's an active use ability in battles. You capture him, and then if you release him, like you can either execute him, though since he's a legendary lord, he's not going to permanently die. But if you release him, you can siphon 5% of this faction's income. And you can do this for multiple factions, like Scarbrand, Malagor, though he's not going to give you a lot of money, Archon the Black, etc. You can make a lot of money every turn by just doing this, especially when you were talking about legendary lords. So you're gaining influence, you're also gaining money, or you can just outright execute them to give Elfarian experience, so you can gain levels very, very quickly. So there's a lot of power in that. On top of that, the Warden Cage ability, which is the ability required to actually capture the lords and legendary lords in battle, it's a major debuff ability against enemy lords. So generally speaking, the ability to put a major debuff on an enemy lord in battle is a significant benefit, because it gives you the ability to just kill them. Like, they can't move. Like, this will do damage, it will last 25 seconds. They're gonna be basically taken out of combat for 25 seconds and take significant damage from both melee and ranged for that duration. Generally speaking, you'd only use it when they're low on HP, but you can also use it when they're high on HP at the beginning of the battle to really just take them out during a crucial portion of the battle, though you won't be able to capture them during that particular stretch, because you only have one use for it. Significant benefit to this ability. They certainly have improved it from Warhammer 2, because in Warhammer 2 it was really difficult to capture with auto-resolve. Now, I actually find it easier to rely on the auto-resolve to capture lords and legendary lords than it is through a regular battle, because a lot of legendary lords may have a lot of missile resistance, can be difficult to take down during that 25 seconds. So getting the timing right can be a bit tricky. But significant ability for every single one of his armies in terms of dealing with lords and legendary lords. Really good start, really good units, a lot of potential during his campaign. Elfarian is a very powerful lord. The issue is that the balance, he starts surrounded by enemies. My advice would probably be to make a rush for Galbraz and then take Warzag out. Rush for Galbraz, ignore Stormhurge, let Scarbrand burn it to the ground. Doesn't really matter. Just take down Warzag before he becomes a major issue. Take his entire province, because it's actually a really good province. Then maybe make some kind of deal with Barak Var, or take Barak Var for yourself, because 3 out of 4 regions there, though sadly enough not the capital, are pleasant climate. And even the capital being unpleasant climate is not necessarily too big of an issue. And then go take a bunch of the territory over here in the Badlands. The highest potential in this campaign is the hardest one, where you're fighting both in Wolf 1 and in the Badlands at the same time, so you're having to split your resources in order to make that effective. But you're going to have that influence, so even if you're not loading a character, you're going to have the ability to recruit a really, really good lord for a secondary or tertiary army. Another thing that the Elfarian does have in this campaign is that when his heroes and lords get to a certain rank, once they level up enough, you get the ability to give them a trait, a special trait, on top of the ones that they already have. So like Cavill starts with the White Wolf, so he has replenishment, he has Geralt of Rivia, but you can then give them some really powerful traits. So your lords, your generic lords and your generic heroes are actually better than the generic lords and heroes that Tyrion, Alariel, Teclis, Alefanar have. And it can actually be great to play a campaign purely as Elfarian, just to level up a bunch of lords and save those characters, and then load them up in a campaign like as Alefanar or Tyrion as Alariel, because it will give them a significant amount of power. Alefanar is really powerful though in his own right, has some really powerful heroes, has more powerful heroes than the other legendary lords of the Isles, has more powerful lords, has a lot of defensive benefits through the Mists of Everest. He's more focused on defense when it comes to his faction effects, his personal effects, his faction effects, but he does have a great deal of power, powerful armies, with a lot of variety to those armies. I mean, Alariel has the Treekin, you have the Knights of Torgaval in your campaign, and the Sentinels, and these units are insanely good, and you can buff them even further. Number 3, we have Gorok of the Lizardmen. Now, I don't think much of the Lizardmen. I think a lot of people have issues with the way the Lizardmen play in general. There's a lot of limitations because the units themselves can be pretty expensive. The armies are thus pretty expensive, and you can't maintain a very large number of them. And your economy, while decent, is not necessarily the best in the entire world. Here's the thing, though. Gorok is ridiculous. Even if we're ignoring the nuclear weapon that's standing right next to him from the very beginning of his campaign, he is actually pretty damn strong. Because he has a right that has a 15-turn cooldown, lasts for 5 turns. It gives his Saurus and Temple Guard barrier. Now, barrier is incredibly powerful because it's able to regenerate them in combat. Now, Saurus are pretty good units to begin with. The fact he can give them barrier means they get a lot of combat potential. Then he gives them expert charge defense, immune to contact effects for Saurus and Temple Guard. So he's really all about buffing the Saurus with that particular right. He also gets barrier hit points plus 500 for all units when defending settlements. So you get a lot of defensive benefits as well with Gorok. Furthermore, Gorok gets 15% unit mass, 10% missile defense for all units in his army. He also gets a bunch of defensive benefits, and he also has regeneration. He is ridiculous, and he does have the Lord effect from the Saurus Old Blood, because that's what he is basically. He's a very, very special kind of Saurus Old Blood, but you can get a minus 20% upkeep benefit for Saurus Infantry and Temple Guard units in his army. That alone, all of that on its own is pretty substantial. But we then kick it up the next level. You know how Ekeclaw is considered an amazing legendary lord because he has a nuclear weapon? Well, so do you. And yours doesn't cost resources to build. Your nuclear weapon is called Lord Croak. Every Lizardman legendary lord can get them, but by the time you get them in any other Lizardman campaign, you've kind of won the campaign already. You start with Lord Croak with Gorok. Now, Gorok has a lot of defense-oriented benefits for himself, his army. You can just throw this guy against an entire enemy stack or numerous stacks, and he will survive. He won't necessarily kill them. Croak will kill them. So, Croak has a bunch of benefits. He starts with all of these items, which give him a lot of power. He does have 3% casualty replenishment and control, which is always nice to have. He causes terror against the Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, and Norska. And then he has the Deliverance of Itza 1, 2, and 3, which do a ridiculous amount of power. So you don't have one nuclear weapon, you have 3 different nuclear weapons, some more powerful than others. So you have the tactical nuclear weapon, the intermediate range nuclear weapon, and the intercontinental ballistic version of the nuclear weapon. Take your pick. Beyond that benefit, with just the Deliverance of Itza being really, really powerful, another benefit does exist for him. So you get control, research, the Supreme Shield of the World Ones, which gives a lot of damage resistance to units within a very short range. But very importantly, over here I'd argue, he has replenishment. Now, replenishment for Lizardmen can be a bit of an issue early on in their campaign. You can get it at tier 2, but it's only really at tier 3 you can get it for more than one army with any other Lizardman Legendary Lord, because you need a tier 3 settlement to increase your hero capacity for Skink Chiefs, and it's Skink Chiefs that give you replenishment. Well, you having a hero that has all those items and replenishment and acts as a mobile nuclear weapon, that is a biblical level of power that you start during the course of your campaign. Or you can go with training if you want to be weird when it comes to that. So the replenishment benefit, you start with 8% replenishment by default, and you can obviously buff it by a further 9%. So that is a ridiculous level of power that Gorok has. He is virtually unkillable in his battles, and to be quite blunt about it, Gorok and Crow can probably solo an entire army, any early game army that they encounter on their own. Your army is just there to be, to auto-resolve, really, so you don't even have to fight the battles on your own. So there's a ridiculous amount of power. Like, replenishment is actually a pretty big deal for the Lizardmen, because they have units with a very high amount of HP. So generally speaking, in Lizardman campaigns, it can be quite painful if you don't have replenishment. So Mazdamundi doesn't start with replenishment. You can get pretty quickly, but you literally start with that. I think only Oxyato actually starts with replenishment in his campaign. I could be wrong on that. So that alone is powerful. Croak is powerful. Gorok is really powerful in battle. You have incredible defensive benefits, and you're much stronger than every other faction that surrounds you. Like, if we're looking at the factions that surround Gorok, Skrolk is a joke compared to you. Yes, I know, the Skaven, which generally are a major menace to deal with in any campaign, are a joke to you. To be fair, Skrolk does end up biting a lot more than he can chew, because he ends up at war with dwarves, the Lizardmen, the Cult of Sotek over here. So he ends up getting annihilated, even if you're not counting Gorok. And then who else is there? Luthor Harkon, the Vampire Coast, is a speed bump for anyone that deals with them. The Demons of Khorne, Albrecht. No other faction in Lustria, in southern Lustria, is stronger than Gorok, with the exception of potentially Rakarth. And that's just really because of the benefits the Dark Elves have in their campaign. But one-on-one Legendary Lord to Legendary Lord, Gorok is significantly stronger than Rakarth is. And besides, Rakarth can't easily get access to you because he needs to go all the way here for this territory. He's going to encounter the cult, he's going to encounter the dwarves. So you actually, although you start in the middle of Southern Lustria, you actually have a pretty damn safe and strong starting position with a really powerful Legendary Lord. Economic benefits once you get him to a high enough level, at level 10, to be able to get the Blessing Quetzal over here. So you have a lot going in this campaign, and it's a breeze to conquer Southern Lustria during the course of this campaign. The only challenge, if you can call it that, is going to be Lord Skrolk, and to an extent Rakarth. No other faction is going to be able to stand up to you, and so you can take all of Lustria with relative ease and then bail out Mazdamundi. He's going to have plenty of issues in his campaign. And you're never going to lose a battle with Gorok, because Gorok can't die. Croak nukes the army. That's the game plan. That's how it works. Great deal of power. It's not necessarily the most fun campaign style, I admit. It's not necessarily something I enjoy a great deal, although I have played an entire campaign as Gorok. The power level is kind of ridiculous when you see it in action. It may be a bit too much. Number 2, we have Valkia the Bloody. Yes, Warriors of Chaos, overpowered, broken, and incredibly powerful. But not all of them necessarily have campaigns that have a biblical level of power. I mean, Be'lakor and Archaon do, Kolic because of Grimgor, yeah, those are the ones. Festus as well because of the Nurgle benefits, though he also has a lot of enemies to deal with. Valkia doesn't necessarily have a lot of enemies to deal with. So what does she get? She gets 15% campaign movement range for all her characters after winning a battle. She has access to bloodletting, so she can get replenishment of foreign territory, Khorne corruption, unit experience for Khorne units. And vassals gain frenzy and spread Khorne corruption. So her vassals are going to be more powerful when it comes to their melee ability. She also has the Gaze of Khorne ability and 35% campaign movement range after enemy retreats from in battle, which is actually a pretty damn big deal, because a lot of the time if you encounter a weaker army, and most of the armies you're going to encounter as Valkia are generally going to be weaker than you, they'll try and run. Well, there's no running from Valkia, that much is true. She does have the Gaze of Corn, so she's getting a great deal of melee benefits for her units. She has as well Vanguard deployment for Cast Marauders, Cast Warriors, and Chosen. Diplomatic relations with Norsca benefit, Vigor Loss Reduction benefit, Ambush Defense chance, Physical Resistance, Wrath of Corn, income from post-battle loot, and income from raising settlements, and the ability Gore Feast, which gives her replenishment. If you've ever fought Valkia in battle, you know how insane she is to take down. She can become nigh on invulnerable. The trailer really didn't do her justice. She is absolutely insane when it comes to her battle potential. In fact, she's such a nightmare to deal with in battle for every other legendary lord that surrounds her, be it Hellebron, Grombrindle, Malekith, that your strategy in battle is to literally take every ranged unit in your army, keep her distracted with, I know, something with either a lord or a hero or something like that, and nuke her with your entire ranged army, and she still survives that for a fair amount of time. That's not something everyone can do. She is insanely good in battles. But that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, she's probably the best combatant of the Warriors of Chaos. I mean, Sigvald can do pretty well, Archeon can do very well, Kolic can do very well, of course, but Valkia in like a proper army battle, because this is the thing, it's hero duels, like lord duels, just one-on-one lord duels are kind of a pointless affair. The reason they're pointless is because most of the time, the vast majority of times, you're going to fight army versus army. You're not just going to fight lord versus lord. Valkia may not have the sheer dueling potential of Grimgor or Kolic, but in a battle, in a proper battle, army versus army, I'd say she probably brings the most out of all the Warriors of Chaos. At least that's my perspective, just because of the various benefits she has and her sheer unkillability. Like, she can survive so much damage, it's not even funny. And that's important in a lot of battles, because that means your army is... that means she can serve as a great distraction, a distraction carnifex, if you will. And the rest of your army will just kill everything else in that. That's how it works. That's the power Valkia has, and then there's her start position. She has flat out one of the best starting positions in the game. She starts in a corner, she has a vassal with 2 regions over here that she can gain very quickly by just auto-resolving the Stark Fortress. She doesn't start with the Hell Cannon, which is a bit of a shame, really, compared to Archeon, Kolic, Sigvald. But here's the thing. The only opposition she has in this campaign early on is this minor Dark Elven faction. That doesn't really have a whole lot to stop her. They don't have an army except the one that you deal with at the very start. And this is an army that's pretty damn pathetic to deal with. You might have to fight the battles manually just to take the Dark Fortress with no unit, without losing. Outside of that, you're just going to be able to curb stomp these guys with ease. And then make them your vassal when you take over their territory. And then sell the territory that you just took from them back. Because you just take these settlements, don't raise them. You just sack them, you take Grond, you leave Grond for last, you vassalize Grond, and then you sell these territories back. And then you have a lot of choices to make. And this is where Valkia becomes ridiculous, where she is elevated beyond just another legendary lord for the Warriors of Chaos. There's a lot of them. Okay, so Malekith in general, when controlled by the AI on Legendary very hard, he tends to build a lot of armies. Actually, the Dark Elves tend to do that in general. They have a lot of benefits. Those benefits work very well. The reason it works so well for the Dark Elves is because a lot of the Dark Elf units are cheap. So if you give them a lot of upkeep benefits and economic benefits, yeah, they're going to crank up a lot of very powerful armies of Dark Shards, Black Ark Corsairs, all that like. One of the things Valkia can do very quickly in her campaign is vassalize Malekith, and then unleash him. Unleash him on Grombrindle, wipe out Grombrindle, let Malekith take all of this territory. Bam, Malekith has a major empire as your vassal. It's the same situation in a lot of ways that Kolic has in his campaign, with the ability to vassalize Grimgor when Grimgor is very weak, and then unleash Grimgor to become really powerful and win the campaign on his own. And if you help Malekith, there's no stopping him. But it goes even further, because Valkia doesn't just have one vassal, she has 3 vassals next to her. I mean, yes, Grond is a minor faction, so they're never going to have the same potential as someone like Malekith. But they're still a Dark Elven faction, so they're still going to produce some pretty powerful armies to throw against your enemies. And then you have Hellebron. What you do in this campaign, once you've dealt to Malekith and Grund, is you go for Hellebron. And you basically give Hellebron all of this territory with the exception of Frozen City, which you keep for yourself. If you can move fast enough, maybe you can vassalize the Greenskins, though I find Greenskin minor factions to be a pain in the neck to deal with as vassals and not necessarily too significant. It's probably better to give Hellebron all of this territory. Take the Dark Fortress here in the Frozen Ruin, maybe vassalize Sigvald as well. You can't confederate him, unfortunately. He is Lanishi. Or just wipe him out, take his Dark Fortress for yourself. It doesn't matter. So, what you can do once you've gotten Malekith, Hellebron, all that, and maybe help them out with some of their enemies, like Rumbrindle, all that. Because if you help Malekith, he's going to be a lot stronger for it, and then unleash Malekith to start conquering, for him to start conquering his way towards Ulfon. And you might want to take Morathia on your own to take her Dark Fortress over there. Your campaign victory conditions, short campaign, is to just take these 2 cities and then maintain control of these provinces for either direct control or vassals and military allies. Basically, this campaign encourages you to vassalize Malekith, and that's something you should absolutely do because there's a lot of power in that. So while Malekith is busily butchering his way towards Ulfon, which by the way can give you access to the Sword of Cain, while that is happening, you're conquering your way through the Northern Castways and Norska. And by the way, you have that diplomatic benefit with Norska substantially. So you can make a good deal with Ulfric, maybe get some Dark Fortresses out of it, maybe vassalize him, and just conquer all of Norska all the way to Archeon, show him who's the real Everchosen. And then once you've done that, you're unstoppable. Actually, you're unstoppable from the very beginning of your campaign, and it never stops. That is the power Valkia has in her campaign. Like, just having Malekith and Hellebron as early game vassals is ridiculously powerful in its own right. It's not Grimgor level, fair enough, but it's still insanely strong what you have at your disposal from the very start here. And number 1 on this list, we have the Sisters of Twilight. I'm not going to talk about Orion until they change him, because they have talked about the fact that they are going to make changes to him, because currently Orion is the strongest legendary lord in the game, but they are going to change him because it's a bit ridiculous what's happening with him. But outside of Orion's upkeep benefit, the Sisters of Twilight are actually the best legendary lord choice for the Wood Elves. There's a couple of reasons behind this. Faction-wide benefits, they get ammunition for all their armies, they have the Forge of Dave, and they have the Volley of Kurnos ability for Hawk Riders. This means that every Hawk Rider has a cruise missile, or even 2 for the Sisters of Twilight themselves, because they have a skill that increases their Volley of Kurnos ability for all their armies, actually, not just their own army. So a great deal of power when it comes to them. And they are basically a flying artillery piece, more or less. The damage the Sisters can do in range while flying is ridiculous. And it's not like their melee stats are that bad either. They're actually pretty decent in a melee fight as well. Though obviously they're not a dedicated melee lord. But once you get the Sisters of Twilight on their dragon, to get their mount choice, they're going to have quite a bit of power in melee as well. They also cause fear, they have encourage as well, and they can shoot while moving. Beyond that, you also have the Forge of Dave. Also, the DLC they're part of does give you Ariel, though that's something that's available to all the legendary lords, well, except Draika. But it's available to Orion, it's available to Durfu, I believe, as well, Ariel, but still pretty substantial to have that DLC for Ariel, which is like the Wood Elven version of Croak. Not quite as powerful though, but still pretty strong. Then the Sisters, when they fight battles, they can get points for the Forge of Dave. And the Forge of Dave gives you some very powerful items that you can put on any lord. So you're looking at an item that can give you a lot of post-battle loot, an item that can give you quite a bit of casualty replenishment. Or if we're looking at the Eagle, ammunition, research, range, ambush defense chance, vigor loss reduction, control, weapon strength, armor, upkeep for all units in every single one of your army. Snipe, which means snipe and stalk. Like snipe allows you to shoot while staying hidden. Dreaming cloak, which allows you to summon Way Watchers. Dreaming ring, all these kind of great items that give you a lot of power. Personally, what I prefer to get is the Dreaming Boots, the Dreaming Cloak. So I want the upkeep, I want the campaign movement range. The other item-wise, I mean, yeah, the Dreaming bow can be pretty substantial in its own right, though the Eagle Bow is also pretty damn useful to have as well. Or you can also gain benefits to all your armies, like missile resistance, armor for all your units, missile strength for one of the most powerful range factions in the game to begin with. The Wood Elves have two really good army choices in their campaigns. Really, really good. Some of the best in the game. They can either go with Tree Spirits, so Treekin, Treemen in particular, or they can focus on Glade Guard and eventually on Weight Watchers. Or you can combine the two, so you have some really powerful melee units, have some really powerful range units, have some decent hero choices, decent lore choices. Or with the Sisters of Twilight, you also have the ability to go full-on Hawk Riders, which means you can kill your enemy while flying in the air, and while range units obviously will do quite a bit of damage, you have the ability to nuke them with cruise missiles from a fairly long distance. You can outrange virtually every other faction, like just win range duels against virtually every other faction, and you have some pretty substantial melee power as well when you're playing the Sisters of Twilight or the Wood Elves in general. The Sisters just benefit from the forge items, the ammunition benefit, the Valley of Kurnos. That's what makes them powerful. And they're also pretty insane when it comes to their own combat ability. Because if we think about Orion or Dryka, it's not really their combat ability that makes them stand out. It's like the upkeep benefit of Orion or some of the unit choices that Dryka has, some of the magic ability that she has, whereas the Sisters just flat out tear apart armies. Not necessarily so great against Lords per se, though they are pretty powerful, pretty good against Lords as well. A reminder, they're still a good melee choice. It's not just like, oh, they're a ranged hero. Yeah, they're a ranged hero, but they're actually one of the few really good ranged heroes in this game, because most of the time when it comes to ranged heroes, they kind of suck, because ranged heroes, ranged lords, and legendary lords, they struggle to even get a single shot off. Like, this is one of the major problems that you have as Alif Anar, believe it or not. Like, Alif Anar, amazing power, but he personally, he's kind of useless in combat in terms of dealing damage. He's more useful as a distraction with his clone, with his shadow, with the fact that he can take a lot of damage, but he's not going to do a lot of damage in his own. The Sisters will do a lot of damage, and they have a ranged army that's probably just as good as what Alif Anar has available. Like Alif Anar, the Wood Elves also have the ability to use basically the Underway in their campaign, though unfortunately they don't have an ambush movement chance like Alif Anar does. And if they had that, they would be even more powerful, but as things currently stand, they are ridiculously powerful as they are.